Hello and welcome to episode 169 of Page One, the Writers' Podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
And thanks for joining us on the podcast where we'd like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers and find out how they got into the industry. And if you've not checked out our back catalogue, please do that because there'll be a guest, I'm sure, that you're interested in, whether it's an author, a journalist, a screenwriter, a comic writer, a video game writer. We've spoken to the whole gamut.
Don't think there's a
run the gamut.
I don't think there is
writers.
a single genre or media left we haven't spoken to. Even in radio.
Yeah, we've done radio. I'm trying to think if there is anything. Nothing immediately jumps to mind.
No.
But people can get in touch if there is a.
Haven't done
glaring omission.
any erotica.
I'm sure.
Have we chatted?
No,
to
we
any
have.
erotica?
We had one guest that had written erotica before they then transitioned to more mainstream
I
fiction.
feel that was sticking in my mind, my dirty mind. I feel I remember that.
I'll look out the episode.
If you
for
could, that'd be
and
great.
send that to
I
you.
know,
Yeah.
just let me know what books I've written. That's the main thing.
But we have a great guest this week that actually crosses over between two of those genres, not erotica.
I was just going to ask. Yeah, this week we're chatting with Fflur Dafydd, who is a Welsh author who's written
and screenwriter.
and screenwriter, I should say, of course. And she's written books, Welsh books, which is then translated into English translations herself. She's written Welsh screenplays. She's won BAFTA, a Welsh BAFTA for her work. And we kind of chatted to her about writing for a kind of small pocket of the UK, of that language, the Welsh language, and then how does that translate to success or notoriety across the rest of the UK?
Yeah, I'm not sure notoriety.
Is notoriety, is that always a bad thing?
It's like-
Notoriety?
Yeah, I feel so. Yeah. Oh, hang on. They wrote in Welsh. They're blacklisted. But no, she does talk about the difficulties that she has, despite having obviously this great success in Wales and recognised success in the form of awards, etc. That doesn't seem to translate when she moves into the English-speaking parts of the UK, which is bizarre, frankly. But it's a really interesting chat we have with her and talk about the differences, obviously, between writing for the screen and writing books and adapting her own work. So we will get straight into it after a quick advert for our writer's notebook, and then we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just a story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
Did you always want to be a writer?
I think so. I was always inventing stories and kind of playing imaginatively, kind of by myself, imagining all sorts of kind of adventures, and then I would start writing these down from quite an early age. So I think it was always there in the background. It was always there as a possibility. And my mother is a poet as well, Menna Elfyn. So I grew up in a house where, poetry was kind of important. There were books everywhere, and me and my brother used to go to like poetry launches and stuff. So it seemed like it was kind of like a normal thing to be doing. But I don't think I ever actually considered making it my main profession, because the experience I had was my mother always had other jobs. And so although I always planned on becoming a writer or writing in some form, I never thought I'd be a full-time writer, which is what I am now. But it's taken me quite a few years to kind of finally make that leap.
And so we'll get to that leap soon. But I mean, when did you first sort of start seriously thinking, I'm going to try and make some money out of writing?
Well, in Wales, we have a lot of kind of writing competitions, especially in the Welsh language. So we have this tradition of the Eisteddfod, for people who don't know about it. It's a large sort of cultural festival that we hold every year in Wales. There's a youth festival, which happens around May time. And then there's the big festival that happens in August. And they have so many different writing competitions. And you get to enter under a pseudonym, which is great, because you have that anonymity and you can send it in. And if you don't win, you still get an adjudication and be able to read criticism of your work. But it's kind of like quite a safe way of competing, if you like. Yeah. And so I started trying some of those competitions at local Eisteddfods as well, and started having a bit of success, making, maybe £5 at a time. I thought there is money to be had here somewhere. And I was really lucky. At the age of 21, I won the main sort of literature medal prize at the Urdd Eisteddfod. And that meant that then my work was published as a result of the competition on the day of the ceremony. And that was the first time I'd kind of seen a book of mine in print. And I was only 21 at the time, which is, really fantastic experience at that age, that you get that. That you get that book in your hand and think, hey, there's a possibility of doing this professionally, because, people were picking it up and buying it and reading it. But yeah, I think that's what we have that's quite unique within Welsh language culture, is that there is that nurturing of young talent, and you are given a platform, which is fantastic. And not all, I guess, young writers have that.
Definitely.
And obviously, the majority of your writing, looking back on your whole kind of body of work, I suppose, is in Welsh, and I wondered, as a Welsh writer writing in Welsh, does that make it easier or harder to break into the writing industry?
In terms of what do you mean? In terms of the industry in Wales, or just generally?
Well, I guess outside Wales, I suppose, in terms of kind of being a known name or
is
being in the industry outside of Wales.
Yeah, is it easier to you have, like you've said, you've got that support in Wales for young writers and stuff. So is it easier to sort of have that path in Welsh writing in Wales, but then how difficult is it to transition from that into a sort of wider audience?
It's a really good question, because you'd think that because we have that kind of system in Wales where you do get to be writing and publishing stuff from quite a young age, and then you have that experience maybe that people in other cultures don't have. But it's still equally difficult, I think, to break into kind of mainstream sort of British kind of literary scene, because again, it's just because Welsh culture is still marginalised, and you're still seen as pretty invisible when it comes to the kind of London-centric kind of literary scenes. And I think it's, what I found most frustrating, I think, in terms of my screenwriting, is that I've been a screenwriter for about kind of almost coming up to 10 years now. And I've had sort of, created my own shows. I've written about 50 hours of primetime drama for S4C, the Welsh language broadcaster. And those shows have done relatively well. They've been nominated for BAFTA Cymru awards, etc., etc. But still, when you go to London, have meetings with producers there, it's almost like none of that counts, even though you've had the experience, been there kind of on the ground doing it, you've been sort of producing, you've been writing, and you've had that sort of wealth of experience that maybe other writers haven't had, because it's tougher to get a commission, I guess, in English, isn't it, with all the major broadcasters. But it's still like starting from scratch, I would say. So it's kind of frustrating, but it just is what it is. It's
I mean, that's hugely frustrating. Just because it's been in a different language, you've got all the
exactly.
experience.
It's been in a different language, and they can watch it with subtitles, and it's been sold internationally. So it's sold, I've had dramas sold to places like Japan and Spain, and it's been in BritBox and America and Canada, but somehow, like, still within sort of that British mold, it doesn't really count.
I mean, is that the same when it comes to like writers who have written kind of Scandi dramas or something, or is it, because they seem to have reached a point where they're kind of well known outside the country that they're made in. There's kind of movement behind them and stuff. But is Welsh dramas writing, is it still to reach that point, you think?
It's interesting, isn't it? Someone like Hans Rosenfeld, who wrote The Bridge, like,
exactly,
crossed over into the British mainstream drama writing. I'd have to talk to him to work out how hard he found it to make that breakthrough.
It'd be interesting.
But I think it's probably, I don't know, make an assumption, but is it easier in some ways because it's not within British culture? So I think there is that feeling of like a slightly uncomfortable, jarring sense that it is the country next door with a completely different culture, and therefore it doesn't sit comfortably in transferring over to kind of the mainstream culture.
Yes, it's not as sort of exotic, if you like, as
exactly.
What you say as a quotes real foreign country or something like that. That's probably got something to do with it. It's a sort of attitude that clearly needs to change.
I think it is the same age-old sort of colonial attitude still there at work somewhere, but it's just been, I guess, as equally difficult for me as what I'm saying as any other writer just kind of starting out. But it's still, I've got that experience, and so I guess when I get into when I get to write the novel or get the publisher or get the script commission or whatever with a bigger broadcaster, hopefully I hit the ground running because I've got that experience behind me. Yeah.
And so, I mean, as you said, when you were 21, you got the book in your hand, but then you have also moved into screenwriting as well. I mean, was that something that you always wanted to do, or how did that come about?
Yeah, my path into screenwriting has not been completely straightforward. I think that as a university student, as an undergrad, I was really interested in film, and so I took a lot of film modules, but then I decided to concentrate on my English Lit degree. And then when I was sort of early 20s, there were a few kind of short film script competitions around, and I ended up making a short film when I was about 22, 23, and that was really great experience of production. It was with the Welsh College of Music and Drama, and so it's all part of their assessment as students, but the film also got to go to festivals, and so following on from that, I started kind of writing to places where I thought there might be opportunities for screenwriters, and ended up working for the Welsh-language soap opera for a bit. Pobl it's called, People of the Valley. It sounds very Welsh, doesn't it? And I wrote a couple, I'm trying to remember how many episodes I wrote, probably only about 10 or 15. And I just felt like I learned a lot doing it, but I felt like the soap structure wasn't quite for me. And so I decided to give up on screenwriting, essentially. I was sort of like, oh, well, I've tried it, I'm not sure it's for me. And then it was around sort of 10 years later, I happened to be off work from the university with my first daughter, was on maternity leave, and I just had this opportunity to meet with a production company and pitch an idea to them. And it happened because I was on maternity leave. I just had a little bit of time, when the baby did actually sleep. My first baby did sleep, which was brilliant. The second one didn't, but the first one did. So I did start pitching kind of a couple of mad ideas, but by the time I'd gone back to work, I got the commission, and it was an 8-part drama, and I'd never done it before, and I was absolutely terrified and didn't know what I was doing. But somehow got through it. And yeah, that first drama series is called Parch, which means kind of reverend, but it also means respect. It's about a female vicar who sort of falls in love with an undertaker and their kind of story in their community. And yeah, that was the point at which I realized actually that I really, really wanted to do this. And so from that point onwards, I've written several series for the same company over a period of sort of 7 or 8 years, which then, you know, resulted in me giving up my university post completely. But it wasn't part of the plan ever. It was just, sometimes I think, you know, things happen at the right time. There's just that moment of kind of luck that, you know, I was on maternity, I was not thinking about university work, I could go to these meetings, and then it happened from there. And so it was kind of my lucky break, really.
Do you think if for folk listening who are kind of wanting to break into the screenwriting world, would you recommend going about it in much the same way, you know, actually trying to create your own show or content that you're writing, and you make it, and you kind of, you know, kind of bypass all the hoops and just go straight to the final product, and you have something to show?
Well, I think it's always useful, I think, trying to break into the industry, to have this really great spec script that you can send around companies. And it's sort of taken me a while to actually have a proper one of those in English, because I was so busy working, you know, on my own series in Wales. So I didn't actually have a spec script for a while. So it was, you know, it was kind of like, oh, you can watch her show with subtitles. Oh, but yeah, they were like, but we want an original script. And so what I found was, once I actually got the time to write a spec script and send it out, that's resulted in a lot more interest and a lot more meetings and forming new relationships with producers and companies. And so I think that's, you know, for someone who really wants to do it, that is the best way of getting those meetings, rather than maybe having an outline. Like, having an outline is good, you know, it starts a conversation, but I think the script is where you can really show the company what you can do, and that's when they really kind of seem to wake up and take interest. So it just takes carving out a bit of time to be able to write that thing that you really, really want to write, and sending that to places.
And we've spoken to screenwriters before, and you know, one of the key differences between screenwriting and novel writing seems to be that you sort of have to accept that you work on stories that, you know, you might have meetings, people will be enthusiastic or whatever, but then they end up not going anywhere. And you just have to kind of accept that as a writer. Whereas I suppose with a book, with a novel, you know, at least once you're published and stuff like that, if you're determined to have that novel published, then there is a way normally that you will get it published eventually. So you have to almost have a different mindset, I think, when it comes to these different types of projects. Is that right?
Definitely. You know, I've had scripts, you know, commissioned as sort of pilot episodes that I worked on for a whole year with a broadcaster, and everyone making the right noises about it, you know, seemingly loving it right until the last moment when they, you know, when they say, oh, something a little bit similar to this. And if you've written like a thriller, they're like, oh, is there a version of this where nobody dies? Not really, you know. So you can get to that kind of point then that you just letting go of that project is pretty painful. And it is, you're right, you have to have that mindset, I guess, when you're writing these pilot eps, if you get script commission, that you know that actually you might not be able to see this project through. And there's very little that you can do about it if a company doesn't come on board. It's not like you could just write the rest and just, well, you could if you wanted to, but with no money to write the rest, or you can't just go perform it on the street, or maybe some people do, but I've certainly just had to accept that, okay, that's the finish line for that project, and maybe the script will be useful for sending to people still, but it won't actually get made. I think with a book, it is so different, isn't it? Because usually no one wants to see your book until the whole thing is done.
Yeah.
That's kind of equally frustrating, because when I went back to writing novels after a long time in screenwriting, I found the process of just keeping going without anybody kind of ringing me to ask me like what I'm doing next in this scene, or, you know, me checking with a producer that, oh, can I do this? Can I do that? Was actually quite, it was quite daunting, really, to realize that it was my kind of journey to go on in whichever way I pleased. As liberating as it sometimes is, you know, it's also kind of really much harder without a voice to consult with. But yeah, you take ownership of that project then, and, you know, hopefully it will get published in some shape or form, and maybe not in the form that you've anticipated, and maybe there's more work to do on it, or you know, an editor will want extra chapters or want you to cut bits of it. But essentially, you know, you have hope that it's this final thing, even if it doesn't end up being published by anybody, you will still have it. You'll keep it in your drawer. Your family will still be able to read it. You know, it's still there as a product. Whereas, you know, often so many screenwriting projects are just sort of half written. They don't even get off the ground. They don't get the opportunity to blossom, which is a shame. I'm sure there are so many fantastic projects out there that just didn't get their chance to, you know, to fly. And it's so, there are so many different factors why that happens, and it's not always down to the writing either. That's what's frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, totally.
And I mean, as you touched on there, the kind of approach as a writer to writing a book or a script is very different, and mainly because you're kind of by yourself in your own head a lot more when you're writing a book. And I kind of wondered, is that something which, now you've had a lot of experience of both, that you prefer the kind of solitary, you're your own boss, or do you quite like checking in with people, having that more collaborative feel when it comes to scripts?
I think I find script writing easier in that sense, in that it is so collaborative, that there's you kind of understand the parameters of it. This week I've been working on a couple of notes that we've had on a script commission, and so kind of sitting down to do that and working on those edits is something I really enjoy, because it's like this mechanical kind of, you know, I know the process, I know what to do, I know how to do a dialogue pass, and it's kind of something that I find that I really am able to concentrate fully on. Whereas I think it's so much more difficult in that sort of solitary, intense space of kind of writing a chapter, say, of a novel, where you're trying to keep going, and you just know there are so many possibilities to it. It can go off in any single direction. And I find that much more difficult now that I've come back to it. I'd forgotten, I think, how intense writing a book is, and how much you live in your own head, and how difficult it is to like just have a normal conversation with a person afterwards when you've been doing this for a couple of hours. Whereas I think with screenwriting, I just shut the laptop and that work is done, that block of work is done, and then I move on. So yeah, they do take up a sort of totally different mechanism, I think, in the brain.
Well, why don't we? I quite was interested to learn about your writing style itself. You know, are you a planner? Do you sit down and plan stuff, or do you tend to go in and just pants it and see where a story takes you? Where do you start with?
Yeah, with novel writing, I am a pretty sort of organic kind of writer, that I will maybe have a general idea of the kind of chapter I'm going to be writing that day. But I do allow myself the freedom to go off in different directions. And I've never really planned out exactly what happens in a chapter, even if, you know, if there's a voice. I do a lot of kind of multiple narration, so I know, right, I'm going to that character's voice today, and I get in the mindset, and I kind of allow me to the writing to take me where it will.
Yeah.
When it comes to screenwriting, I guess, again, because of that collaborative kind of structure that you have, that they don't really trust you to sit down and write the pilot episode unless they have seen every single beat that you are planning, to put on the page, every single action, structure, kind of even more or less an idea of what the characters are going to be saying in every scene. And so it's much harder to divert from that once you get going, because you think, well, no, they've signed off on this.
Yeah,
what
exactly.
say if I introduce like a totally different character in this scene, and they're not going to be too happy about that. So, and sometimes a producer will kind of let me do that on occasion if the plan hasn't worked. He'll come back and say, oh, actually the last 10 pages of this weren't quite what we'd hoped they'd be on the page, so try something else. But it's pretty prescriptive in a way for those first couple of drafts until you are able to kind of go off in a different direction. And
is having that kind of, here's the linear route you have to follow when you're writing this script. I guess there's just something quite nice about that, in the sense that you're never worried about coming up with an idea for where it can go next. But then there's also a flip side, it takes away the kind of spontaneity or the excitement of discovering something new, or a new idea sparking off something where you can't really play with it.
Yeah, so in some ways that's maybe why I find the screenwriting easier in some ways, because I get focused on there's the plan, I'm starting to write the episode, and I know exactly where I'm going, so it helps you plan your week as well. A lot of the S4C dramas I write are in 4 parts with the commercial break, so I'll do like part 1 to 4 in the first 4 days of the week, and then the 5th day I'm looking over the whole episode. So there's that particular structure to it. But there are moments, I think, where I'm kind of, there's something that maybe me and the producer have kind of argued about. This is, should we do this, should we do that? And then I've compromised on something, and when I'm writing it, I'm like, I told him this wasn't going to work, I'm trying to make it work, and it doesn't work. And so sometimes you have to kind of, go down that route. And it's not until you're kind of right in the brains of the episode, like in the mechanics of it. It's like opening up the car bonnet and you're in the brain, you're in the engine. You kind of like see, this is not, parts are not fitting together. It may have looked great as this scene by scene, but actually when you start making the characters speak to each other in this scene, it just doesn't work. So that's why I'm really always happy when they say go to script, because it's like, finally we get to see if any of this stuff works. Because I think there are probably people who are really good at outlines and treatments who probably maybe are not so great at script, and I'm sort of the opposite. I hate outlines and treatments. I really hate them, because I think it's so easy for someone to kind of pick up on things that maybe don't work, or they'll always have like an issue with the ending, and I'm always frustrated about that. I always want to say, but this is not going to be the ending, this is just the ending. I have to show to you that it is going to be, so you can let me do something else. But it's so hard having to lay out all your plans when it's going to be pulled apart in a way.
Okay, so what happens if you sign off on the plan, on the script, and then you write the script and you cannot get a scene to work, or for whatever reason it's just not working, it's not, the characters aren't feeling right, the scene's not kind of gelling or whatever? What do you do at that point? Can you go back and say, look, I've tried writing the scene as we agreed, it's not working, can I try something else? Or do you have to stick with what they've kind of said?
Yeah, I think there's always a discussion to be had with the producer about that. And I think that usually they can see that the problems have been, caused by this kind of plan, that the signing off on the plan maybe too soon, not thinking how it will work. I'm lucky in that, the producer I work with, we have a sort of a close working relationship. We've been working together on, most projects over about 7-8 years. And
so there's some trust there, I suppose.
Yeah, there is the trust there that, okay, that didn't work. Like I was saying, we'll say the part 4 needs to be written again, but it doesn't always mean that he will want me to do an exact plan of what I'm doing for 4, part 4, because he just thinks, well, okay, maybe let's just see what happens. And usually I find a way through it. But it's, it is really difficult, I think, with screenwriting, especially, like all the various people and companies that I work with, they all have their own style of giving feedback and giving notes, and you have to kind of navigate, when to push back, when are you right, when are they right. It's a lot easier, I think, with editors, because you have like one editorial voice usually guiding you through your novel, and if you have that good relationship with the editor, then that enriches what you're doing all the time, and it's not listening to a million other voices saying, this is not quite right. Because again, that's what happens with the scripts, is that the producer and I will really happy say we've got 6 scripts, so we do a read through, and then some of the actors will start having an issue with some of their lines or some of the scenes, then the director will be not sure about how this is going to be shot, or what the emotion is. And so usually, like, going back from the read through with your pile of scripts is when you start to really question what you're doing, and how can I work through all these different people's sort of opinions and queries. And you usually find a through line, and it usually makes the scripts better. But for like the 2 hours afterwards, you're just kind of feeling despondent.
and with with books, I suppose the difference is that, like you say, you've got the editor, but the editor is generally one person. It might be 2 or whatever, but that is making suggestions normally to you. But ultimately, it's your story. Whereas with films, with TV and things like that, there are so many other interests in it that can cause the thing to have to be changed, even if it's not how you originally envisaged it, I suppose.
Yeah, you've put your finger on it there, because that's what editors always say, is that it's your story. I'm here to support you, to guide you through, to make suggestions, but ultimately this is your story to tell in the way that you want. When it comes to producers and directors, no, this is not your story. This is, you are the workhorse, and you will try and make it fit whatever production we are creating here. So they are quite, can be quite ruthless, and there's a lot of kind of different needs, as you mentioned, to be kind of met, different concerns about budget, etc. Sometimes just when I go back to fiction, it's like, oh, this is so liberating, not worrying about what can I afford, this vehicle and this scene. Of course I can. It's a novel. No one cares.
Another helicopter explosion. I can just do
have
that.
as many helicopters as you like. Throw people off buildings. It doesn't matter. Exactly. And that's what you always have to kind of rein in. With your screenwriting, and I've become particularly adept at this because I suppose the budgets are usually lower than the bigger broadcasters as well. And so when I started writing, pilot episodes for bigger broadcasters, they were like, you're allowed to kind of, go out of the room here. They're allowed to be outside, and they can be in the car talking, and so I'm starting to kind of broaden my range of different things that I can do. Stunts, I added a car chase to a script that didn't actually need it at all, just for the novelty of having a car chase.
Just because you could.
It's funny. It's these things, I suppose, you don't ever think about a writer having to have concerns about. Is, can I afford to make what I'm writing? It's one of these things. As when you write, as you say, a script, it's 100 things to actually have in your head. And when you adapted your own novel, so The Library Suicides was your book, and you adapted that into a script. What was that like? That must have been a very different process, writing that script.
Yeah, it was, because I think a lot of people think that really novelists shouldn't adapt their own novels. I've heard it said that it's like taking out your own appendix, i.e. you're not actually trained to do it, and you probably die in the process. And it was pretty painful, if I'm being honest, because I realized very quickly that because of the budget that we had, so it was a micro budget film scheme, so we had a pot of money to make this thing, and The Library Suicides happens during one day in the library, and with a cast of characters that's quite large. There's a sort of group of hostages, and there are people milling around the library, and we realized very quickly that we're going to have to boil the story down to just the 4 main players, so the twins, the library porter, and Eben the biographer. And in order for that to be realistic, it had to be a night shift. So the whole sort of mood of the film completely changed. And also it had to become less of a dystopian narrative and more of like a psychological thriller, because you couldn't really create that dystopia with just the four characters running around the library. It had to be a sort of different sort of playing out of the mysteries and the thriller element. So there were loads and loads of changes, and I think I did about 50 scripts or something.
Wow.
And we had lots of different partners on it, so lots of different financiers, and we had, I think it was the 50th draft, I think, and we had this meeting with all the funders on the opposite side of the table, and they just went, I think we quite like the first draft. Okay, that's fine, absolutely fine. I'll just undo the last sort of 49 drafts. And I remember sitting with the director having a drink afterwards, and we were just looking at the first draft going, oh, this is all right, actually, it's pretty good. But we'd obviously tied ourselves in knots trying to answer all the different notes from all the funders, and we'd sort of gone a little bit mad with it, I think. And it ended up doing really well. It sort of travelled internationally and won a couple of awards of performance and directing. And it was, we're really proud of what we made. But again, it was sort of with that micro budget in mind. We tried to make it look as good as it could within that budget, which meant making all these story choices. So I think people who'd read the original book or came to see the film, their minds were a bit blown by, wow, this is not the book I read at all. And so then I was able to write the English language version of the novel, regaining all the things that I'd lost in a way, and also sneakily took a few scenes from the film that were not in the original book. So
I was going to ask that. Yeah, so you did that. Yeah,
there were. That's one way I was able to kind of quite satisfyingly kind of bring back things like the scenes that they cut from the film, which I was really frustrated about. There was a scene that we had a porter walking through the loft of the library looking at all the portrait busts of sort of Welsh cultural figures and kind of talking to them, and he was a little bit stoned, and it happened at a point in the film where it was slowing the film down a little bit, and so it was cut. And with glee, I just kind of rewrote it into the book, and it was never there originally in the Welsh original. So I had fun doing things like that, because I could take, I guess, from both versions and create, a third version that was slightly different.
Yeah, that is interesting. That it's the English version of the book then is because when you think of when I read I don't know. I'm thinking of the Carlos Ruiz Zafón.
Shadow of the Wind.
Yeah, Shadow of the Wind. That was it. Yeah, I was just I kind of assume that obviously with some skill, it's just been translated from Spanish into English, and I'm reading the same book. But I suppose it is possible, as with yours, that it's the story itself has perhaps changed as for the language as well.
Yeah, I think that also, I had changed as a writer in the time, from the 2009 publication to, bringing it out in 2023. And I think that also working with Hodder and Stoughton, who wanted more of a kind of like a crime thriller, certain things had to change in order for it to kind of be the book that they wanted it to be, and also what I wanted it to be, just this kind of new thing, so that even the readers of the Welsh original still felt like they were getting something different. And I guess the way I write about Wales, and I call it just the small country in this book, and England's the neighbouring country, I write about Wales and Welsh culture differently in English, and it's, you can't make the assumption that they know anything about Wales, and so you do find that it does transform into something new with a new kind of, there's slightly new denouement as well in the English language version that was not there in the original, because it's a different kind of impact on the audience. And so there is a twist there that maybe the Welsh readers of the original would not have seen coming. So yeah, I've had fun with it. It's something I tend to do anyway when I adapt my own work from Welsh into English, because I think that I basically just get bored of my own story. There was another novel that I wrote that came out in 2008, 20,000 Saints, that was based on a book set on an island that I'd written 2 years previously in Welsh. But I just started writing it and just decided to kind of kill off characters I'd gotten bored of, and it sort of evolved into this different thing, and it became double the size, and it was kind of an adventure, I guess. But also there's a sense of cheating some English language readers from ever really knowing what exactly I did in the Welsh original. So maybe one day I should let someone else do the translating.
Well, I was going to ask you that because, like, a lot of people would struggle to do that, I think, because you're essentially, you're basically going to kill off your own book, your creation, your characters, etc. And people wouldn't want to. We'd find it hard to take a book and then put it into 2-hour film, knowing you'd have to cut a whole bunch of it out. But you seem to quite enjoy the fun part of just mixing things up again.
Yeah, I think I've sort of decided that it's sort of maybe part of my process is to kind of adapt and change, and to play around with stories that I've created rather than remaining completely faithful to them. I think there's that sense of I can't really offend myself by doing these things. And so it's, that kind of element, there's a thrill and excitement in changing things. And, I had to get my head around the fact, okay, the film was not going to be the same as the book, but it had this sort of different feel, a different edge. It became a sort of a more eccentric in some ways, but more thrilling in others. And it was just it kept my interest in the writing the whole process, because I was not feeling like I'm just stuck with this idea that I've got to write over and over again. I think that's why the 3 versions are pretty different, because I'm trying to find out what I didn't do in the previous version. What tricks did I miss, and how can I try and reinvent them?
Yeah. And the library suicide as well explores. You've said it's well, especially in the English version, it's almost a sort of thriller, but it explores the sense of the loss of national resources and identity and things like that. I mean, are themes like that stuff that you want to explore, especially perhaps in the English version, where you're trying to, talk about Wales and tell people about Wales as well? Is that something that you would try and fit into your stories?
Definitely. I think that, I can't really help myself really from doing that, because I feel that it's quite important to give people this kind of glimpse into, a minoritized culture and what it is to feel invisible, or to feel on the periphery of things. And hopefully to do that in a way that is fun and quirky and different, and is not the story that people are expecting. And I think, part of the fun of doing that kind of thing of setting a thriller in a library, in a national library, is it's the last place on earth anyone would expect anything exciting to happen. And I'm just so aware of not reinforcing any kind of Welsh stereotypes, of kind of run down kind of rural villages that were kind of all living in sort of huts in the in the forest or something. I think some crime dramas, especially the ones that try to tap in this sort of Scandi noir success, I think the Welsh noir dramas sometimes try to go for those stereotypes, because it's sort of something comfortable or recognizable for the audience. Oh, that's what Welsh identity is, and that's what I'm trying to do always with my work, is to show a completely different side of it, or to be a little bit left field in the way that I present it. And all the characters in the library suicides are a little bit offbeat, and but they're still quintessentially Welsh in my mind. So it's always that attempt to kind of show difference and show otherness in hopefully entertaining ways.
Mm-hmm. And are you still enjoying sort of doing both novels and screenplays? Is it something that you would like to do going forward, doing both of them?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I'm probably these days primarily a screenwriter, and that takes up, a lot of the working week. But having had this novel published with Hodder. It's a 2-book deal. So there's another novel that I'm working on at the moment. I'm nervously awaiting my editor's notes on the first draft. And what's really exciting about this, and also really terrifying to me, is the fact that it's a completely original concept that is not a reversioning or reimagining of anything else that I've ever done before. It's just an English language novel that is original. And so that's going to be interesting, I think, in the way it kind of, what the editorial process will be on it, because it's far more kind of, it's not quite there yet. I feel like with the Library Suicides, when I was kind of working on that reimagining, I'd always had that structure in mind anyway. And so I knew it was more or less ready, and it just needed a few extra things, but it was more or less ready. With this, I feel like, this needs a lot of work before it's quite ready, and I'm ready to apply myself, but I'm also a bit daunted by the work that's ahead of me, because I think that's the main work comes after, I think, you submitted that first draft. It's great, it's an achievement getting it down, and I'm pleased that it exists and that the editor's seen all of it, but I just know that actually the main bulk of the work is actually yet to come.
And what is your kind of routine, I suppose? Do you tend to treat it like a 9-to-5 job and just write, even if the kind of the vibe isn't there, you just push through and just get words on the page type thing?
I these days just work around my kids, basically. So once I get the youngest off to school, I'm back at my desk by about kind of 10 to 9. I have a black coffee to like set my mind alight, because it just like does crazy things to my brain, and then I can work between 9 and 11 really efficiently. So if I've got something that I'm working on that really needs my attention, I'll try and save that time for that job. And if anybody wants a Zoom or a meeting, it's better to have it later on in the day. Then I usually take a sort of break over lunch, maybe go for a swim. I've been reading Haruki Murakami's book, Novelist as Vocation, where he says to be a novelist, you have to be fit. And so I had never realized this. Now I'm trying to get fit, because Murakami
now you can finally be a novelist.
Yeah. And then I'll work probably after lunch then, 1 till 3 till 3:30 till the kids come home. Then usually it's kind of it's all sorts of chaos of taking them to different places, and I'm not good in the evenings. My brain doesn't really want me to work in the evenings, or I won't sleep well, so tend to watch TV or read in the evenings, and then kind of start again the next day. That doesn't sound like I'm doing many hours, I know, but I am. I'm applying myself.
Solid 2 hours in at the start there.
Well, my youngest is away at a camp this week, so my oldest leaves about 8:15. So I'm thinking, I can start working tomorrow at 8:20. Imagine the work I'll get done in that 40 minutes before 9 o'clock. So maybe I'll find that's a revelation. We'll see.
And so you've got this the second book, the first draft in with the editor. What else are you working on? What's next in the pipeline?
I'm working on several script commissions for various broadcasters and companies. Most of them, apart from one actually, are all adaptations of crime novels, other people's crime novels.
Okay.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So that's an interesting process, because I'm in charge of the adaptation. I'm very wary of my own processes of how I did it with my own novels, and I'm not taking those kind of liberties with other people's work. And so we'll see what happens with those commissions. Again, it's one of those where there's no guarantees that they will get made. Also working on a new spec script, because I haven't written one for a while, so that's in the pipeline as well. And potentially we'll see. I maybe we'll have another series with S4C. There's my series at Amgueddfa, the museum. The second series went out at the start of this year. So just waiting to hear on a third series. So that's in very early development stages, but again, it might not happen. But there's still plenty of things to crack on with, because even if they don't get seen. It's
You've
still,
got to
we're
write
still
them.
in the
Yeah,
process of like
exactly.
putting all the work into them. Yeah.
How do you do that? How do you juggle multiple writing projects at the same time? Because if you go into the world of an author who is only an author of novels, they'll be very like focused on that one story. They want the voice for that story, and that's all they'll concentrate on. But as a screenwriter, obviously, you're jumping between all sorts of different projects.
Yeah, that's yeah, that it is tricky. I think this is where the kind of the clash happens between the novel writing and the screenwriting. And I certainly felt this last year. It was really, really difficult to juggle the fact that I had these really intense edits to do on the library suicides, and I was enjoying working on them, but I could not give it all my time because I also had deadlines for the scripts. And so that's when I find it really tricky, because you're going from one intense sort of solitary mindset into this other very, very structured, collaborative mindset. And I don't recommend anybody who works on a novel and screenplays at the same time. It's just like, it's maddening. It was a really tough year, but somehow it got done. This year, I'm hoping I'm going to be able to structure it in a slightly different way. I don't find it that difficult to jump between screenwriting projects because, again, of just their nature, that, like I was talking about, like the shape of them and the parameters. Like one day maybe I'm working on a couple of scenes on a script, and the next day I'm working on a treatment for another project, so it doesn't feel like I'm using the same parts of my brain. But ideally, you'd have, say, these last 2 weeks, actually, I've been doing edits on episode 1, episode 2 of this crime thriller, and I've tried to just concentrate on that and nothing else. The odd thing will come in, and you'll remember that you promised to judge a writing competition for a festival, and then it's like, oh, right, I'm gonna have to try and find the right time of the day to do that. That is a different part of the brain again. But yeah, it is a massive juggle. Ideally, I'd have a whole year to write a book and everyone would leave me alone. But it's in the screenwriting world, it feels like you've got to keep going, and you've got to keep popping up, and you've got to keep trying for jobs, and you've got to, keep talking to people. That's a very familiar phrase, I think, in the screenwriting world, of like, let's keep talking. So you're just endlessly talking to people about potential things that you could be doing. But
like
yeah,
a shark, you always have to be swimming or die.
yeah, exactly. It's so hard to take time out of one thing or the other, and this is what I did do. The last sort of 7 or 8 years, I took completely, basically just time out of novel writing completely, and just to the point where I was just doubting if I ever had been a novelist, or would I ever be one again.
Yeah.
And so getting the library suicides published just felt like a moment where I could just tell myself, okay, you can do it. It's tricky, but it's not impossible.
What was the last book that you read?
The last book I read was The Pharmacist by Rochelle Atala, who I met in Aberdeen in the Crime Writing Festival, about a pharmacist in a sort of strange dystopian world where they're all living underground in a bunker. And the pharmacist has kind of great power over everybody there. And yeah, really enjoyed it.
Excellent.
Nice. What about the last film that you watched?
Oh, the last film. Can I do TV instead? Because the last film I watched was probably something with my 10-year-old daughter, like Zoolander or something. But the last TV series I've just finished, actually, because I just want to talk about this. I've just finished Search Party, the American series.
Oh yeah, is that on Apple? Is it? Yeah.
I don't know where it came out originally, but it's on iPlayer now. I don't know if you've seen this, but it's a really, really quirky show about a group of young people who are just kind of looking for this missing girl that they don't really know very well, and they don't really care about that much, which leads them into this really dark place where things happen and it just sort of snowballs, and becomes complete surreal and crazy by the end.
Oh, cool.
There's
Okay.
5 series of this, and
wow, I've never heard
I've
of
been
it before.
completely addicted to it. So I've been on this massive journey with this cast of characters, and I just finished the last episode last night, and I'm feeling a little bit bereft because I didn't want to let them go.
Oh,
But
I'll have to
yeah,
look at that.
it's a really quirky, different crime series with a real edge, and it's fun as well, which is always something that appeals to me.
Excellent.
Nice. Well, that was the main stuff, and then the very, very last thing we do is a super quick fire, either or. And I always say there's no right answer here, perhaps apart from one. But we'll start off with novels or screenplays.
Novels.
TV or cinema?
TV.
Night owl or early bird?
Early bird.
Music or no music when you're writing?
No music when I'm writing.
And the last one, real book or ebook?
Real book.
Ah, nobody ever picks ebook. What about audio book or ebook?
Oh, ooh, ebook rather than audio.
Ah, I should have asked audio book. Or ebook. We'll edit that out.
We'll put it back, yeah. Edit that in. Well, thanks very much to Fflur for coming on there. I thought that was a really interesting chat. And, you know, talking to her about adapting her own work and in that adaptation sort of changing the story in a way just to keep it interesting for herself apart from anything else.
Yeah, no, it's kind of that rare chance you get to fix things which maybe bugged you about your book when it was already out. So yeah, it's and I suppose, you know, I've read a lot of translated books and stuff, and you always wonder, is this the same tone as the original book, or is the same intention, or is the sentence exact same meaning and things like that?
I'm sure there was was it Dracula? I think it was Dracula that for years was in Iceland or somewhere like that. They had done a translation and it was a completely different book.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The translator had just decided to go off in a completely different path.
Just write his own book.
Yeah, essentially. And just call it Dracula. I don't know if it was Dracula, but I have a feeling it was. Or maybe it was. There's definitely also been a Russian version of Lord of the Rings that was quite different as well, I think, as well.
Oh,
So
that's
yeah,
quite interesting.
it must happen. There must be a you know, probably quite an interesting documentary or something to look at these books that have suffered very, very different fates across the world.
I often wonder then who checks? Like, is there someone checking it over to make sure, or do they just trust the translator?
How do you know?
It's like that guy who was doing who's the guy I was thinking of? Is the guy doing the sign language? You know, he was making it up.
Yeah,
and he was stood next to the famous Mandela, etc. through the years, I'm sure, on stage, just doing random signs in the air, and for years ago with it because nobody picked, nobody checked, nobody said anything, nobody knew who was there.
It is. It's the subject of. It reminds me of that film with Richard E. Grant and about the hoax.
Will you ever forgive me? Yes, forged.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where
what's the word I'm looking for? It's the
letters.
Remember. It's forged letters from famous authors and stuff.
That was it, exactly.
Yeah.
People get away with these
people
things
just trust
for a
it, and
long
if you
time.
because people, if you get a reputation for it, if you get known for it, you just do it, and it's not a bad idea. We should do that. I wonder if anyone. No one knows what Dickens' signature is, do they?
You're going to become a translator for foreign books.
Yeah.
Just write
into English. Just write both.
No, but thanks very much to Fflur for coming on there. Library Suicides is out now, and look forward to seeing more of her work on screen as well, and hopefully
definitely.
Across a wider audience as well. That would be great. And next week we have another writer that crosses many genres as well.
Yeah. Alistair Beckett King is our guest next week, who is a stand-up comedian, a very funny stand-up comic, who's also written video game scripts, and he has his first children's book out called Montgomery Bonbon Murder at the Museum, which is just out in February this year, and it's a really fun chat we have with him. He's a really good laugh.
Yeah, no, it's funny and really interesting as well, just hearing his process for these different types of things. He is a huge, I think, on the video game side, he's a very, very big sort of point-and-click adventure game aficionado. So we have a bit of a chat about that as well. So, it's a great chat, so please do tune in for that one. If you enjoyed today's episode or any of our previous episodes, please do take the time to give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, as that helps us to continue to get great guests on the podcast.
And if you'd like to get in touch, you could always drop us an email in the email machine, which is podcast@rightgear.co.uk, or you can get us across multitudes of social media networks by searching for @UKPage1 on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky, and on Mastodon and Facebook. Damn it! And on Mastodon, you can go to writing.exchange/@page1pod, and on YouTube, just type in Page One Podcast. Yeah, you'll find us there somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. No, I have to say, I'm not enjoying having to manage 20 million.
No, I know. I feel do you not think there should be a program that can do it for you?
Doing it. Yeah, there should be one. I think there are programs.
There probably must be,
it, but you just have to pay them a lot.
Pay
of money.
for it, yeah.
And we're cheapskates, so we're not going to do that. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, and we will be back next week.
See you later. Can I just say that's a really dreadful sign off? I'm gonna next week. I'm gonna have a different sign off because I feel that's just stilted and crap. Anyway,
bye. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well, so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is @UKPage1, as evidenced here. And our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.